Hi everyone, welcome. If you've ever considered embarking on a journey through Mexico while still maintaining a budget, this video is for you. In this video, we'll explore some of the practical aspects of living and traveling in Mexico from my own point of view, a single traveler who's been on the road for about 5 months. I've navigated the diverse landscapes of Mexico from bustling cities to serene rural landscapes, all the while managing my budget and my 2 dogs. I'll provide a breakdown of monthly costs, including accommodations, fuel, tolls, food, groceries, you name it. And in the end, I'm going to summarize by giving you an average of the monthly costs for me traveling through Mexico for the last 5 months. Through these experiences, I hope to provide you with the realities of journeying into Mexico on a budget and the realities of what you'll need if you plan to do the same. I spent the first 5 months, almost 5 months in Mexico, traveling every 1 to 4 weeks. And that was a great way to see a lot of area, a lot of city quickly, which is what I wanted to do in Mexico. Exploring Mexico is what I was here for. But paying for rental accommodations every 1 to 4 weeks is much more expensive than paying for a long-term rental. So now that I'm in stationary near Pátzcuaro, I'm going to do an assessment of how much I'm spending as I live in the same place, and the last 5 months, how much I've been spending traveling. It's quite a difference. That will be part 2 next week. The other high variability item is gas and car maintenance and tolls. Obviously, if you're traveling by bus or plane, you won't have these expenses. And obviously, if I wasn't traveling long distances, I'd have a lot less gas charges than I do when I'm traveling every week or so. So that's a consideration. Obviously, if I was traveling 4 or 5 hours every week to a new destination, that would be a lot more in fuel costs than it was when I was stationary. And some places have toll roads that I definitely used and some places didn't. For instance, I paid about 1,400 pesos in tolls from Nogales to Mazatlan, which is worth it, I believe. I recommend you taking the toll road if you can. They're much better than the Libre roads and they're considered to be safer. And then from Sayulita down to Manzanilla, there were no toll roads, so there wasn't an option for that. So as far as expenses go, you can see the variability there. Now that I'm in one place, I just pay for gas driving in between the villages that I want to see and going to Morelia. So my costs, I don't know, I'll have to see if they're the same or less, but we'll see what happens. Some things I left out of this report because it can vary too much in between different people. Or you might leave these expenses out altogether. For instance, if you're not driving yourself, you don't need to worry about your temporary import permit or auto registration or auto insurance. So I left things like that out, but I have included things like gas and tolls so you can get an idea of how much it costs to drive yourself. I also left out things like personal health insurance, subscriptions that I have, like to online newspapers and that sort of thing. I left out the vet bills that I paid when I initially got to Mexico, because hopefully you won't have that problem. And you may or may not get a temporary or permanent residency visa, so I have left those costs out as well. These are just basic costs of traveling in Mexico for a single person. Things like accommodations, food, groceries, going out, tickets for admissions, things like that. Entertainment. Please remember that there are more expenses than what I'm talking about in life. There's shoes and clothing, there's the dentist, there's getting your nails done, there's getting a haircut. There's always something that could come up, like an emergency or an accident, that could really blow your budget. So keep that in mind when I'm explaining my budget and how I'm just going over the basics. Let's talk about accommodations. The advantages of short-term rentals, mainly I used Airbnb, are that you don't have to take care of any other bills like utilities. You don't get a bill for electric and internet and water and gas. It's all in one. So that's the advantage of a short-term rental. Also, you don't have to buy any household products. Like I haven't bought toilet paper in 5 months. So there is a little bit of cost savings there. But in the long run, long-term stays are much less expensive than short-term stays. So keep that in mind as you're looking for temporary rentals in Mexico. If you stay up to 4 weeks, you can get a hefty discount. I was happy to stay in a couple of our rentals for 4 weeks each. This allowed us to really get to know a town, really get a feel of the area and settle in, and I really like that. Plus, on the cost and expense side, it's a lot cheaper when you can do a long stretch like that versus 1 week at a time. So when I'm talking about long-term rentals, usually in Mexico, I find that they mean 6 months to a year. The least I paid for a 1 week rental on Airbnb was $180. That was really good. The most I paid for an Airbnb for 1 week in Mexico was over $600. And if you spend any time looking at Airbnb, the website, you will see that it goes up from there. You can spend a lot more money than that. So I'm considering myself a pretty frugal traveler. Taxes and Airbnb fees also add up. So if I was ever to go back to one of these rentals that I liked, I would probably approach the owner offline or on the phone so that maybe we can make a deal without all that. In most cases, I negotiated with the owner and asked for a discount because I'm just one person and I usually book these rentals kind of last minute. So I think the owners knew if they didn't have a booking in their calendar by now, they probably were going to have an empty house. So usually I think most owners would rather have a discounted price than an empty house. And I'd say maybe 85% of the owners I talked to gave me a discount, so that's great. If they didn't want to, they didn't have to. There were plenty of people who just didn't respond or just said no, and a few others who would counter with their own offer, and I could either take it or decline. So there's room for negotiation out there. Don't be shy about it. It really helps if you have positive reviews on Airbnb, especially if you're bringing pets. I found that if an owner is too concerned about my dogs, I'd really just rather make a deal with someone else, because the fact is I have 2 large dogs, and if they're worried about it, I don't want to worry them, and I'd rather deal with someone else who's more relaxed about it. I try to get up all the fur before we leave, and I've never had any damages from my dogs or myself in an Airbnb rental, but I have been asked to pay a little bit more for cleaning fees on occasion, which I'm happy to do. I would suggest approaching an owner with the phrase something like, would you consider this discounted price for your lovely rental because of whatever, and then give them an idea of what your budget is, because you don't want them to have to guess. Very few owners said no, and I'm very lucky to have had many nice rentals. So let's talk about entertainment, going out to eat, that sort of thing. What you need to understand about my budget is that I'm very frugal. I really don't go out to eat that often, maybe once a week, if that. And everybody has a different lifestyle, so you have to consider that if you want to go out to eat, like say for breakfast and lunch 5 days a week, you have to count that into your budget because it's not really in my budget. I may spend more on groceries, but then I'm just one person and I don't eat that much. But suffice it to say that we all have different lifestyles, and if you have one that you want to keep, that means going out and partying or fancy restaurants, consider that an upgrade from my budget. When I do go out, I've had meals for as little as $2 US for tacos, and as much as like $20 or so at a more touristy place. You can go up from there if you really like fancy. So what I did to calculate this average is I took the length of my journey, which was 5 months, but I erased the first 10 days because that was a lot of one-night hotel stays, crossing the border and all that. And I also subtracted the last 3 weeks because I've been in my long-term stay since then. So it turned out to be about a 4-month calculation. And then I added up all the expenses. And if you'd like to see the actual numbers, like for accommodation, for phone, for groceries, I'm gonna put all of that on my website. The link is down below the video in the notes. You can see exactly what I've spent. But I'm gonna give you an average, the highest month, the lowest month, and an average month to show you how much it cost me to travel through Mexico for the last few months. Everybody has a different way of traveling. I called myself frugal earlier, but there are much more frugal ways to travel than what I've done. You can stay in hostels if you don't have pets. You can camp. There are many ways to go less expensive than what I've done. So consider that when you hear my budget. So here it is, the bottom line. My expenses for April were $1,818, that's US dollars. April was nearly the most expensive month in my trip so far because of lots of fuel and total costs, and also an unexpected move at the last week to a new rental because we needed air conditioning really bad. So that was one of the more expensive months. In May, I spent about $1,355 US dollars. And that was a less expensive month because I had low cost rental for almost the whole month, and I didn't travel any long distances, so that kept my expenses low. In June was my most expensive month, and that was $1,929, that's US dollars. And that was expensive because I was in very popular areas of the country like San Miguel de Allende and Guanajuato. I moved more often, and those rental costs just add up. In July, I spent $1,133. July was my least expensive month because I had a nice rental in Villa del Carbon for the whole month, and I didn't do any long distance driving. So the combination of a whole month rental and no long distance gas prices really made it my cheapest month. If you'd like to see some contact information for some of these rentals that I would recommend, go to my website, and I've made a page there with direct contact information. The link is in the description below the video. So that's an average of $1,555 per month for the whole 4 months, which is a little bit more than what I wanted to pay for my stay during each month in Mexico, but it's gonna be that way if you're traveling around and you don't have a long-term rental. And that's one of the reasons we've decided to stay near Pátzcuaro for a while, to bring down the cost of living and stay in a long-term rental, which I really love, for at least a few months. By next week, I should have utility bills like trash and electric bill, so I can see how much less it is for me to live in Mexico in this one stationary spot versus all that traveling around. I think it's gonna be significantly less. Here's one more consideration you should think about, and that is the exchange rate. If you're coming from another country, you might have other currencies to spend. When I first came to Mexico 5 months ago, the exchange rate was about just under 17 pesos for a dollar, and now it's up to almost 20 pesos for a dollar. So things can change rapidly. That means if I was to pay 10,000 pesos back in April, it would have been the equivalent to 588 US dollars. And now it's more like 536 US dollars. So that's quite a difference in just a few months, and it can happen very fast. So if you're coming from another country, consider the differences in exchange rates and how that can go up and down. There's just one last thing I want to say, and that is that when I was much younger, I was a single teenage mother, and you can imagine money was tight in those days, so I had the ability to talk myself out of buying anything that my son and I did not need out of necessity. There was no choice. Well, that kind of stuck with me, and frequently now I talk myself out of buying things that I don't really need, and it's kind of led to the ability to be a budget traveler.
Not that I've never spent money. I used to love to go to every new restaurant and try every fancy meal. But the habit of being a saver instead of a spender overall has helped me save money and be a frugal traveler.